My girlfriend made fun of my body in a group chat, so I sent the screenshots to her friends and never responded to her again. I'm a 24-year-old guy, and I thought I'd finally found someone who made me feel confident. I've always been the shy type, the kind of guy who shrinks in the background at parties, avoids mirrors when I can, and feels the weight of my own insecurities every time I step out in public. For most of my life, compliments felt like lies, and teasing from friends or family would stick in my head for days. Then Kayla came along, and for a while, I forgot that I even carried those doubts around with me. She had this way of making me laugh at myself without making me feel small, and I clung to that feeling like a lifeline. Kayla was everything I wasn't: confident, magnetic, socially outgoing, the kind of person who could walk into a room and have everyone's attention without even trying. Yet she was warm with me, attentive, always asking about my day, sharing memes she knew I'd like, and sending random texts just to make me smile. We bonded over the smallest things: video games, our shared obsession with late-night horror movies, even debating whether pineapple belonged on pizza. I loved those little battles, the way she'd grin when she was right, and I'd fake argue back, both of us laughing until our sides hurt. Our early relationship felt effortless. Long walks, spontaneous coffee runs, lazy weekends, sprawled on her couch, watching movies I'd normally never admit I liked. She'd casually brush her hand against mine, lean into me when we sat close, and those little touches made me feel like I belonged somewhere. But even in those perfect moments, there were small flashes, teeny things that made my stomach tighten. Once she laughed at a joke about my body in a group setting, the kind of laugh that lingered a second too long. I felt a heat rise in my chest, that old self-conscious knot tightening. I dismissed it, told myself it was harmless, that I was just overthinking. I wanted to trust her completely, to believe that she cared about me the way she said she did. And for a while, I did. But somewhere under those laughs and casual teasing, a tiny seed of doubt had been planted on. I had no idea it was about to grow into something I couldn't ignore. I started noticing little things that didn't sit right. It began with Kayla whispering to her friends when I was around, just small comments about my clothes or how I looked that she tried to mask as jokes. I'd catch her friends glancing at me with smirks or awkward little laughs, and my stomach would drop every time. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was just imagining things, that maybe I was too sensitive. But the more it happened, the harder it became to ignore. My confidence, which had been slowly rebuilding, started to falter again, and I felt the familiar itch of anxiety creeping in whenever I anticipated seeing her or her friends. One evening, we were at a small get-together at her apartment. I was laughing at one of her jokes when I heard her softly comment to a friend, "He's cute in a weird way, though."
On the surface.
It sounded harmless, but the tone, the emphasis on weird, stabbed through me. I forced a smile, but inside a storm was brewing. Later that night, while we were texting, I asked her about it, trying to sound casual. "Hey, what did you mean earlier when you said I was cute in a weird way?" She responded instantly, laughing. "Relax, it was just a joke. You're too sensitive sometimes." Her words should have calmed me, but instead they did the opposite. I felt dismissed, like my feelings didn't matter. That familiar knot of self-doubt tightened, and I started wondering if I'd misread everything, if her teasing had always been a subtle way to make fun of me behind my back. I couldn't tell anyone, not without sounding paranoid, so I carried it alone. Even when we were alone, things felt slightly off. She'd sometimes make playful, little remarks about my eating habits, my laugh, or how I looked in certain clothes. Though I tried to laugh them off, part of me couldn't stop analyzing every word. I told myself I was overthinking, that it was harmless teasing, that love meant tolerating little jokes. But deep down, the seed planted in part one was starting to sprout, and I didn't yet realize how much it would grow. And then one evening, I stumbled upon a notification that would change everything, but I didn't know it yet. It happened one night when I was scrolling through my phone while Kayla was in the kitchen making tea. A notification popped up from a group chat I hadn't been added to her friends' chat. Curiosity got the better of me, and I glanced over her shoulder just as her phone lit up with a message. My heart sank. There it was, a string of jokes about me, about my body, about things I had always been self-conscious about. One message said, "LOL, He actually thinks he's hot, bless him. Another, did you see him in that shirt today? Poor guy has no idea. My stomach dropped, and I felt like someone had punched me square in the chest. I froze. I'm sure if I should confront her right then, or pretend I hadn't seen anything. I could hear the clink of mugs and her humming in the background. So normal, so casual, and it felt like a cruel contrast to the storm building inside me. I wanted to shout, to throw the phone across the room, but I didn't. Instead, I left it there, a pit forming in my stomach, and said nothing. Later, when she returned with the tea, I tried to act normal. Everything okay? She asked, smiling brightly. I nodded, forcing a smile of my own. But my mind was racing. Every memory of her teasing, every comment she had brushed off as a joke, every smirk from her friends suddenly made sense. It wasn't playful. It wasn't harmless. It was deliberate, and I was the punchline. I wanted to confront her immediately, but fear and disbelief held me back. Why would she do this? Why would she mock me to her friends? I kept asking myself over and over. I felt exposed, humiliated, and small, like everything I had worked to build in confidence was crumbling in an instant. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling my chest tighten and my stomach churn. The laughter, the intimacy, even the small touches that had made me feel loved, all of it, suddenly felt like a carefully constructed illusion. And the worst part? I realized this wasn't the first time. There had been little moments before, little flashes of betrayal, and I'd ignored them. I had trusted her blindly, and now that trust felt like it had been ripped out from under me. I knew I couldn't stay silent forever. But I also knew that confronting her now would change everything, possibly forever. The next day, I tried to act normal, but I couldn't. My chest felt heavy every time I saw her, and even her smile felt like it had a hidden edge. I decided I couldn't hold it in anymore. When we were alone in her apartment, I took a deep breath and said, Kayla. I saw the group chat. The message is about me. What was that? My voice wavered more than I wanted. Betraying the storm of hurt and humiliation, I was holding back. She looked at me, eyes widening in mock surprise. Wait, what? You saw that? She said, leaning back casually on the couch. It's not what you think, babe. They were just jokes. You're being way too sensitive. Her tone was so calm, so dismissive, that I felt my anger falter into confusion. Just jokes? I whispered, my throat tight. They were laughing at me, Kayla. At me. How is that a joke? She shrugged, spinning it like it was no big deal. Come on, I didn't mean anything by it. I was just teasing. You're so dramatic sometimes. Can't you take a joke? The words hit me like icy water. She wasn't apologizing. She was making me feel like the problem was me, like my feelings were invalid. Every ounce of trust I had left felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I tried to hold my composure, but the humiliation from seeing her friends laughing at me still burned inside. I wanted her to understand, to feel the shame, to say sorry, but instead she made me feel guilty for even being hurt. I felt trapped between anger and disbelief. The apartment felt smaller, the walls closing in as I struggled to breathe. Every laugh she had shared with her friends echoing in my mind. By the time she walked to the kitchen to grab her water, I was shaking slightly. I realized then that this wasn't a one-off mistake or playful teasing. She didn't see me as a partner. I was entertainment, joke, and the realization was crushing. I didn't know how to respond or if I even should, but I knew one thing. Something had to change. And just as I was about to decide whether to speak up or leave, she tossed a casual comment over her shoulder that made my stomach drop even further after that day. Things between us shifted in subtle but unbearable ways. I started noticing the little digs Mortani, almost invisible jabs about my eating habits, my hair, the way I laughed. They weren't playful anymore. They were pointed, calculated, and they made me question everything I thought I knew about her. Even when we were alone, I felt like I was constantly under scrutiny, like I had to measure every word, every gesture, to avoid giving her something to laugh at behind my back. It was exhausting. The confidence I'd felt at the beginning of our relationship was slipping away like sand through my fingers. I also began to pull away from her friends, the ones I used to think of as ours. Every time they've popped up in conversation or on social media, I felt that same pang of humiliation, laughing at my insecurities, sharing jokes at my expense. I wanted to confront them, to make them understand how deeply they had hurt me, but I was afraid it would only make things worse. Kayla had already shown me that she could twist any confrontation into a way to make me feel guilty. And I wasn't ready to play that game again. One evening, I tried to joke about something harmless during dinner, hoping to lighten the mood. Instead, Kayla smirked and said, "Oh wow, that's adorable, really. You always try so hard to be funny." Her words were coated in sarcasm, and it stung worse than any outright insult. I forced a laugh, but my hands trembled slightly, and I felt my chest tighten. For the first time, I realized that this wasn't just her teasing me, it was systematic. Every little comment, every smirk, every joke had been chipping away at my self-esteem. And I hadn't noticed until it was nearly gone. I felt isolated, like I was the only one who saw the truth, trapped in a relationship that had slowly become toxic. Every time I thought about leaving or confronting her, a part of me hesitated, unsure if I could survive the fallout. And yet, the humiliation was building, pressing on me with every passing day. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what or if it would even matter. Then, one afternoon, I stumbled across something on her phone that made my stomach drop completely. It was worse than I could have imagined, and I knew in that instant that my life with her was about to change forever. It happened when I was helping Kayla tidy up her apartment. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and for some reason I still don't know why I glanced at the screen. My heart stopped. There it was, a screenshot of me from just last week, one I had thought was private, sent in her group chat with the caption, "Can you believe he actually thinks he's sexy?" Lo. My hands went cold, my stomach knotted, and the room spun. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This wasn't teasing. This wasn't playful. This was deliberate, cruel, and meant to humiliate me in front of her friends. I backed away, trying to process the scene in silence. Kayla noticed my expression and tilted her head, a smirk playing at the corner of her lips. "What's wrong?" she asked casually, like she hadn't just destroyed something I'd trusted completely. "You look tense." My chest burned with disbelief and anger. How could you do this?" I barely managed to say, my voice shaking. She laughed softly, almost mockingly. "Do what?" I just shared a funny screenshot. "You're taking this way too seriously. Can't you just lighten up for once?" I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make her feel even a fraction of the humiliation she had caused me. But all I could do was feel my throat tighten. Everything I had believed about her, the kindness, the warmth, the laughter, felt like it had been a carefully constructed mask. I realized then that the private world we shared was nothing more than a stage where I was the butt of a joke. And the audience was her friends. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my bed, staring at the ceiling, running the images through my mind again and again. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I had experienced before. I felt exposed, small, humiliated, and angry. So angry. I kept thinking, how long has she been doing this? How many times have I been the joke? By the time the sun rose, a decision had started to form in my mind. I couldn't continue pretending, couldn't continue being the punchline. Something had to change. But I also knew that confronting her now would be like lighting a fuse, and I wasn't sure what would blow up first. Her ego or the relationship entirely. And just when I thought I had reached my limit, I discovered that her betrayal went even further than I had imagined. I spent the next few days in a fog. I couldn't stop thinking about the screenshots, about the way she and her friends had laughed at me behind my back. Every little moment we'd shared, the late-night texts, the quiet laughs. The small touches suddenly felt tainted, like a movie I'd been watching with someone else controlling the plot. I realized that if I didn't do something, I'd be stuck in this humiliation forever. So, I started planning. I didn't want to confront her blindly. I wanted control, leverage, a way to make sure she understood exactly what she had done and how it had hurt me. I began carefully gathering evidence, scrolling back through old messages, screenshots, and notifications. Every joke, every smirk captured in words, every comment that had been brushed off suddenly took on a new meaning. The more I collected, the clearer it became. This wasn't just teasing. It was a pattern, a cruel strategy, and now I had the proof to back it up. I felt a strange mix of fear and empowerment. For the first time since discovering the betrayal, I felt like I had a weapon, not a weapon to hurt her physically, but something far more potent: the truth. When Kayla tried to chat casually during this time, I kept my composure, hiding the storm inside. She didn't notice, or maybe she just assumed I'd be oblivious, like I always had been. But every message I sent, every time I pretended to be relaxed, I was calculating, preparing. My mind went over countless scenarios. If I exposed her behavior to her friends, how would she react? Would they believe me? Would I finally reclaim some dignity? Or would this backfire? I also wrestled with morality. Part of me wondered if I was becoming the kind of person I despised, calculated, plotting revenge, but another part whispered that I had been nothing but patient, nothing but loyal, and now it was her turn to face consequences. My heart still ached, but the anger had sharpened into focus. I wasn't going to lose myself in tears anymore. Then one afternoon, as I was organizing the evidence, I noticed something that made my chest tighten even further. A message from one of her friends that hinted at just how far the humiliation had spread by the time I acted. I felt strangely calm, almost detached. I sent the screenshots to a few of her close friends, the ones I knew she trusted and confided in. And then I didn't say a word to her. I didn't call. I didn't text. I just waited. Watching from the sidelines was its own kind of power. I could feel it settling in, a quiet satisfaction mixing with the lingering hurt. I wasn't cruel. I was reclaiming something that had been stolen from me, my dignity. Her friends' reactions came almost immediately. Shock, disbelief, whispers of, "I can't believe she would do that. He didn't deserve this," scrolled across my mind like a muted film. Some expressed outright disappointment in her. Others asked me for details. For the first time, I saw her carefully curated image start to crack. I watched her start to realize that the little jokes she had made, the screenshots she had shared, the laughter at my expense, it wasn't going to stay hidden. When Kayla finally confronted me, her eyes blazing, I stayed silent. "Why did you do this?" "I trusted you," she snapped, her voice trembling more with anger than pain. I could see her struggle to mask panic beneath the fury. I didn't mean anything by it," she stammered, as if repeating the same excuse over and over could somehow erase what she had done. I didn't reply. I let the silence do the work. Her words fell flat, her arguments weak, because the people who mattered, her friends, had already heard the truth. I walked away that night feeling a strange mix of relief and lingering hurt. I hadn't spoken, hadn't yelled, hadn't tried to shame her. I had let the truth speak for itself. And the best part? I could see it in the subtle messages, the cautious glances, the way her friends now approached her differently. The world she had created for herself, the one where I was the joke, was crumbling quietly around her. But even as I felt a sense of justice, a part of me knew that the final confrontation, the moment where I could fully reclaim my power, hadn't happened yet. And deep down, I knew it was coming one way or another. A few days after the fallout, Kayla tried everything to pull me back in. She called, texted, even showed up at my apartment once, tears in her eyes and her voice trembling. "Please, just hear me out." I didn't mean any of it. "You're overreacting," she begged, wrapping her arms around herself as if I could feel her remorse through the screen. But I couldn't. I had been humiliated, manipulated, and gaslit for weeks. And her sudden display of vulnerability felt like a calculated move to get me to forgive her. Every instinct screamed at me not to fall for it, but a part of me still hurt, still lonely wished it wasn't true. I sat on my bed that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every laugh, every joke she'd made at my expense, every moment I had been the butt of her private amusement. I felt small, exposed, and foolish. How could I have trusted someone so completely? How could I have let myself believe she cared about me? The anger I had felt before had been replaced by an emptiness so heavy that it was hard to breathe. I realized that no matter what I did, no one could undo the humiliation I had endured. Not me, not her, not even her friends who had seen the truth. I felt utterly alone, questioning my worth, wondering if I would ever trust anyone again. The confidence I had painstakingly built over months had crumbled into dust, and I couldn't see a way forward. Every option felt heavy with consequence, confrontation, forgiveness. Walking away, they all carried a weight I wasn't sure I could bear. I had reached the point where the pain was so raw that it was almost paralyzing. And yet, in that darkness, a quiet clarity began to form. I realized that the only thing I truly controlled was myself. No one could take my dignity if I refused to give it away. The anger, the humiliation, the heartbreak, they were mine to acknowledge. But they didn't have to define me. I didn't know what the next step would be. But one thing was certain: I wasn't going to respond to her. And I wasn't going to let her have the satisfaction of my attention by the time I made my decision. I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't angry anymore, not the burning, desperate anger of before. That fire had been replaced with clarity and focus. I decided I wouldn't respond to Kayla at all. No explanations, no confrontations, no arguments. I simply stopped replying. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight lift slightly from my shoulders. Like a chain I hadn't noticed I was carrying had been removed. Her friends had already seen the truth, and that truth was quietly working behind the scenes. I watched as messages trickled in, little confirmations that what I had exposed had rattled her. A few of them reached out to me, expressing shock, disappointment, even admiration for my restraint. I didn't need to say a word. The evidence had spoken for itself. For the first time, I realized that I had power not because I humiliated her, but because I had maintained my dignity in the face of betrayal. When Kayla finally confronted me one last time, her voice shaky, eyes wide, I didn't flinch. "Why are you ignoring me?" she demanded. I looked at her calmly, without saying a word, and that silence said more than I ever could. It said I wasn't hers to control. It said I had finally stopped letting her define me. She sputtered, tried to guilt me, tried tears, tried promises to change, but I didn't care. I had already reclaimed myself. Walking away that night, leaving my phone untouched, I felt lighter than I had in months. The humiliation, the betrayal, the endless self-doubt, they were still there. But they no longer had the power to dictate my actions. I had drawn a line, and for the first time, I was on the other side of it, and as I looked out the window at the city lights that evening, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. A few days later, I finally allowed myself to breathe. I wasn't checking my phone. I wasn't replaying the group chat in my head. I wasn't waiting for some apology that would probably never come. For the first time in months, I felt like I had space to think about me, my life, my worth, without her shadow hovering over it. The anger and humiliation were still there, but they had softened into something manageable, less like fire and more like fuel for moving forward. I realized that the real victory wasn't in exposing her or making her feel embarrassed. It was in reclaiming my self-respect. I started reconnecting with my friends, the ones I had avoided because of the awkwardness her betrayal had created. Conversations flowed easier, laughter felt genuine, and I noticed a subtle shift in myself. I was walking taller, speaking with more confidence, and feeling less apologetic for existing in my own skin. It was a small change at first, but it grew steadily, like sunlight breaking through clouds. The realization hit me hard. I didn't need her validation, her attention, or even her presence to feel worthy. I had it within me all along. I even thought about Kayla occasionally, wondering if she had learned anything, or if she was still spinning her web of casual cruelty. But the curiosity was fleeting. It didn't matter anymore. The people who mattered, my friends, my family, and most importantly, me, knew the truth. And I had proven to myself that I could endure and rise above betrayal. I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. I didn't need to scream, confront, or shame her to regain my power. Silence had been enough. And as I looked back on the relationship, all I felt was gratitude for the lesson it had forced me to learn. Boundaries. self-respect, and knowing when to walk away. I had survived humiliation, betrayal, and manipulation, and I had emerged stronger. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized that freedom, true, unshakable freedom, was the most satisfying revenge of all. But even with closure, a part of me knew that the final chapter, the ultimate liberation, was still quietly unfolding. Weeks passed, and life slowly began to feel normal again. No more whispers, no more hidden laughter, no more pretending that everything was fine. I realized that the silence I had maintained wasn't emptiness. It was strength. Every time I resisted responding to her messages, every time I refused to let her gaslight me into guilt or doubt, I reinforced my own boundaries. I wasn't just walking away from I was walking toward myself. I started focusing on things that made me feel alive and confident again. I picked up hobbies I had abandoned, spent time with friends who reminded me of my worth, even started dressing in ways that made me feel good about my body, not hiding or apologizing for it. Each small action became a statement. I belonged to no one but myself, and no one had the right to make me feel small. It was a slow, steady reclaiming of dignity, and for the first time, I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was just me, occasionally. I heard through mutual friends about Kayla. Her image with her social circle had shifted subtly. Some people questioning her behavior, others shaking their heads at her manipulation. I didn't gloat, and I didn't intervene. I realized that karma, subtle and silent, had its own rhythm. My focus wasn't on her anymore. It was on building a life where I could thrive, unburdened by betrayal. And so I moved forward, carrying the lessons of that painful chapter with me. Trust carefully, value yourself, and never allow someone else's cruelty to define your worth. I had survived humiliation, manipulation, and betrayal, and I had emerged stronger, more self-aware, and truly free. Looking back now, I don't feel anger anymore. Feel gratitude. Gratitude that I recognized the toxicity, that I found my own strength.
Wow.
And that I chose silence and dignity over petty revenge. That choice changed everything. I finally understood that the ultimate victory isn't in making someone pits, in reclaiming yourself. Entirely, I'm free. And that freedom is the only response she'll ever get from me.